We're live.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our regular council meeting for Monday, July the 11th. Call the meeting to order at 6:33, and we will begin by, as we always do, with the playing of the national anthem. So I would ask that if you're able, that you please stand. We would like to begin by respectfully acknowledging that the town of Shelburne resides within the traditional territory and ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, including the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, Chippewa, and the people of the Three Fires Confederacy. These traditional territories upon which we live, work, play, and learn are steeped in rich Indigenous history and traditions. It is with this statement that we declare to honor and respect the past and present connection of Indigenous peoples with this land, its waterways, and resources. And we encourage residents to review the call to action information, which is on the website that's posted on the screen there now, to further educate and research for oneself. Just the standard reminder that all members have a duty to declare any pecuniary interests, and that disclosure must be made both verbally and in writing. Can I have a motion to adopt the minutes from our regular meeting from June 27th? Councillor Hall, seconded by Councillor Bonato. Are there any questions on those minutes or any discussion? No. Okay. All in favor? That's carried. Madam Clerk, were there any questions submitted this evening?
No questions this evening, Your Worship.
All right. Any council inquiries? No. Okay. All right. Right into the regular agenda then. So the first item is a report from our town planner, and that is with respect to a sign bylaw variance for the Fieldgate commercial development on Ojibwe Road. Steve, welcome.
Good evening, Mayor Mills and members of council.
I think the report's fairly straightforward. I mean, as we've seen before with other sign variance issues, I mean, it's really a function of our sign bylaw probably needing to be updated to reflect the new development realities within town. So I mean, I wouldn't feel any obligation to go into great detail, but I'll turn it over to you, and you can maybe give a summary and then see if there's any questions.
Sure, and I will be quick about this, but I brought some graphics along just to explain the rationale a little bit for the sign variance as outlined in my report. Did that come up okay, Mr. Mayor?
Yep.
So this application was filed by Lovett Signs, which is the sign company assisting Shelburne Commercial Developments, which is Fieldgate, for the new plaza development at Highway 89 and County Road 124. I think everyone's familiar with the location. So this is at the new intersection of Ojibwe Road and Highway 89. And just a closer view of that block, it's block 216. We don't have an up-to-date air photo, as I'm sure the overhead view of the plaza is changing by the week. So there's 3 buildings in the plaza, 3 main buildings. They're divided into smaller units, and the ones that are highlighted on this site plan just indicate those that a sign variance has been requested for. So there's a total of 5 commercial businesses for which sign variances are requested. The other buildings already do comply, and sign permits have been issued for the most part. So the LCBO, the Foodland, and the McDonald's, as well as the Pizzaville and the Starbucks, all of those signs complied with the bylaw, and for the most part, those sign permits have already been issued. So just as an example, with one plant, which is a retail cannabis operation, they're in the middle unit of the southwest building. They just identified, as some of the other tenants have identified, that they kind of have 2 sides of their unit facing out that's visible from the roadway. So the front of the unit is at number 1 here, facing east, and that's visible certainly from traffic coming into town from the east on 89. But then they were concerned that traffic coming from the west that's already in town moving east really can't see until they reach the entrance of the plaza, that there is their store and where to find it. So one plant is proposing the same size of sign on both sides of the building. So the one on the back would look like this. The one on the front is within, it's not subject to the variance request, it's within the sign bylaw requirements. The one on the back, though, would be additional to the sign bylaw. So that's the purpose of the variance for one plant. I will just note that the sign bylaw leaves some flexibility on how to calculate the size of the sign. So we're kind of using the smallest area, which is the letters, the actual advertising component, rather than the full box of the sign. So for Mary Brown's, they have 3 exterior walls, one facing east, which is the front, one facing north, which is visible from Potawatomi Crescent to the north, and then one facing west. And so they're proposing 2 main signs, one on the east or front fascia of the building, one on the north face of the building, the same size as the one on the east. So basically recognizing their 2 frontages, and then a smaller secondary logo on the west side over here, number 3. And it's this kind of approach that in our recommendation we're approaching, where you have the main elevations of the building have the primary signs, and the smaller, more nuanced or discrete signs on the secondary elevations, really more for direction. And then this just summarizes the area of the sign when you just do it based on the actual words that are advertising the business. For Pet Value, they have a larger elevation. The signboard itself is fairly wide, but the words are quite small. So the main or south-facing elevation, their sign does comply with the maximum of the sign bylaw. However, they are asking for a second sign on the north side, so you can kind of see it as you're coming south from County Road 124, and certainly when you're on either Anishinaabe Drive or Potawatomi Crescent. So a smaller sign on the north side is proposed, and that's the reason for the variance for Pet Value. For Barbarito, both their front and back signs are proposed to be the same size, and they both exceed the size of the sign bylaw. We are recommending that there's, in fairness to the other businesses in the plaza and other businesses in town, that they should reduce the size of their sign on the front and the back, so that it's within the 10% of the fascia area on the front and within 5% of the fascia area on the back. So a bit smaller sign is recommended for Barbarito than what is proposed. For Dollarama, they actually have already installed a sign on the front of their building, and it is within the maximum of the sign bylaw. They had originally proposed a larger sign, so this graphic illustrates the larger sign that was proposed, but the one that was installed is a bit smaller. I've asked the applicant if the intent of Dollarama is to replace the existing sign with a larger sign if the variance is supported as proposed, but I haven't heard back on that yet. So it's my understanding that they would keep their sign as it is on the building because it does certainly seem large enough. And that's our recommendation, is that they should maintain the current sign on the building, which is within the sign bylaw maximum. And then the sign on the back, is shown here. It is a bit larger than we would recommend for a secondary sign on the other elevation. So we are recommending that this should be reduced to 5% of the rear elevation. And this is just a photo from a few days ago illustrating two of the signs that are up. So pet value, this sign complies with the bylaw. Dollarama, this one complies as well, but as mentioned, they were proposing one that's a bit wider on either side of this and a bit taller. So we think that this sign will remain as it is. So just in table format, summarizing the ones that a variance is proposed for, Barbarito, we're recommending that these should be limited to 10% on the front facade and 5% on the back. For one plant, they're within the 10% already for the front and within the recommended 5% on the back. For Mary Brown's, they're within the 10% for the front and would be within the 5% for the back and the side. For Pet Value, they're within the 10% for the south and would be within the recommended 5% for the north, which is the back. And then again, for Dollarama, they are within the 10% for the sign they've already installed. Their original sign proposal was larger, so would have exceeded the 10%. And we're recommending that their north sign should be slightly smaller than proposed 5% instead of 6.5%, just again, to be consistent throughout the plaza. So the recommendations, these are in the report, but just summarized here. Again, that the north facade of the 3 units identified here should be the secondary fascia signs, as well as the one on the west facade of these units should be limited to 5% of the architectural elevation, or 10 square meters. And then the second recommendation is really that the front facade signs comply with the bylaw, which is 10% of the elevation area, or 20 square meters. As I say, most do. It's just these 3 units that had requested a slightly larger sign. And then finally, that they also obtain any required permits from the MTO and the county, building and sign permits, and that all of the requirements of the sign bylaw be met. So happy to take any questions on my report, should you have any. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Are there any questions for the planner? No? Okay. So the recommended motion then simply is to receive the report and to approve the minor variance or variances rather that have been requested, subject to the requirements that were listed and that Steve kind of highlighted through his report. So can I have a mover and seconder for that? Moved by Councillor Fegan, seconded by Councillor Buffett. All in favor? That's carried. Okay. And Steve, you're up again. So we have a request for extensions for some draft approvals for the Scone plans of subdivision and condominium.
Yeah, I didn't prepare a presentation for this one, Mr. Mayor. I think you're familiar as a council with this process. This was recently done for 600 Main Street as well for the subdivision and condominium project there. This one is farther along in that they have obtained building permits for the first 29 of 33 townhouse units. The site is serviced now, the road is complete, the grading work is mostly complete. And so they're off and running to build the units. So the reason for the extension is simply to allow some more time to register the second phase of the subdivision, which is just a small part of it, where that land had been transferred from the town to Scone, which was formerly part of the First Avenue right-of-way. And then the other part is the condominium itself doesn't get registered until the units are further along, because they have to create the foundations in order to create the subdivision lots, so that those subdivision lots can form the parcels of tie land to the condominium. And so they really can't register the plan of condominium until they're further along in the building phase of the project. We are recommending 1 year rather than the 3 years that were requested, just to make sure that this doesn't, unduly pause or anything like that. And there's no indications that will happen or is is a risk, but in case there's a further checkpoint needed with council a year from now and another extension request is made, this would allow a check-in to make sure everything's progressing as planned. I will just note there was a typo in the third part of the recommendation. Number 2 and number 3 both reference the plan of subdivision, but in fact, the third one should reference the draft plan of condominium, which is DPC, not DPS 1702. So this would, the recommendation is to extend both the draft plan of subdivision as well as the draft plan of condominium.
Yeah, and Alice provided me with an update.
And happy to take any questions on my report and recommendations.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe you've been provided with an updated resolution that fixes that error.
Yep. Okay. Questions for Steve on this one? Okay. Yeah, I appreciated the 1 year extension rather than the 3. I think that makes sense. I mean, if they absolutely need more time beyond the year, that's something that the next council can consider. But to your point, I think it provides a bit more impetus to move this along as quickly as possible. And if absolutely necessary, then they can check in again in a year's time. So. Okay, so the revised resolution then reads as follows: be it resolved that report P 2022-22 be received for information, and that council approve the request for extension of the conditions of draft plan approval by Design Plan Services on behalf of Scone Developments Inc. for draft plan of subdivision, which is DPS 17-02 for a period of 1 year. And the council approved the request for extension of the conditions of draft plan approval by Design Plan Services on behalf of Scone Developments Inc. for draft plan of condominium, which is DPC 17/02 for a period of 1 year. I have a mover and seconder for that by Councillor Bonato, seconded by Councillor Hall. All in favor? It's carried. All right.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Steve, thanks.
Yep.
Have a good night.
Too.
Okay, next is our CAO's report regarding the vaccination policies update. So we had discussed this a couple of months ago and knew that we were going to be addressing it again in July. So here we are. Denise?
Thank you, Mayor Mills. So as you said, yes, the previous report was in March of 2022. And at that point, staff had recommended, based on the input of not only our staff, but in consultation with other municipalities on what directions they were taking. This was obviously well in advance of the current directions that not only federally, but provincially have been put in place, with a large portion of vaccine-related mandatory requirements lifted in a number of sectors. There are certainly still some policy continuations for those in high vulnerable areas like long-term care in some hospitals, but in consultation with a number of other municipalities and the directions they're taking, for example, the City of Ottawa and the City of Burlington and the City of Hamilton had actually had a staff report in the last couple of months that recommended that their vaccination mandatory policies for staff be lifted. The resolution through the council, however, at the time was that would be continued. So in terms of the staff input, we again consulted with our colleagues just to understand what their feelings were. It's a little bit different than last time, but the overall input, at least with respect to mask wearing, even though it's not addressed in this report, is that we would continue on a voluntary basis and be mask friendly. But the majority of staff, even though it was quite close, indicated that they would support the vaccination being discontinued for now. So this report has recommended a suspension of our current vaccination policy, somewhat consistent with upper levels of government. And it is being suspended for a reason and not terminated in the event that a seventh wave, which we're understanding at the time this report was written, I relied on the federal minister, chief medical officer, and their consultation at the federal level. Ontario has seen a recent spike in hospitalizations with the seventh wave, we understand, having started. But this report is still recommending at this point that the staff policy, which applies to third-party contractors, be suspended. And I know in the past, we've asked a staff for direction from council on the status that you would like to have with respect to your policy, which also applies to volunteers that are appointed to boards and committees. This report, though, instead has recommended for the same, that you as council and your appointees also suspend the policy with the opportunity, obviously, if warranted, to reinstate. So that really is the summary. It is noted that we understand that there is a difficulty if the policy was to continue in accessing not only free tests, but paid tests. So we would have some challenges if there were a continuation in meeting the requirements for the mandatory testing for those that were not vaccinated for continued employment. And again, without knowing what the future costs would be, we use the estimates based on what we currently have been paying, which is about $20 for the package if it wasn't free, or $40 if it was actually completed at the pharmacy. And it requires that the individual be tested generally twice a week. There's a number of policy implications which are listed in terms of employment standards. And as I've also said, that we will always, as an employer, put a huge priority on the health and safety of our staff and our colleagues, and be compliant with any directives, whether they be from the province, the federal government, or our local public health medical officers. So I'm happy to answer any questions, and thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Denise? I'll just add my thoughts. I mean, I'm fine with the council and board committee policy aligning with staff. I think that was kind of the intention from the get-go, that, you know, whatever we're asking of our staff, we should be prepared to ask of ourselves. And if we're suspending the staff policy, then I think it only makes sense to make sure that the other policy aligns with that. So I'm fine with that recommendation. If there are no questions, then can I have a mover and seconder for the motion that's contained in the agenda? So that is just to receive the report and to suspend both the staff as well as the council and committee vaccination policies. Moved by Councillor Fegan, seconded by Deputy Mayor Anderson. All in favor? That's carried. All right, next is the Q2 financial report. So Carrie, do you want to present that?
Sure. Thank you, and through the mayor. This is the second quarterly report up to and including June 30th. Pretty much everything is on track as far as budget goes. There are a couple areas where just because of inflation and things like that, we are paying a little bit more for certain things that we hadn't specifically budgeted to include that additional cost. But it's also offset by other areas where we still remain under budget due to such things like conferences and that staff have not attended in person just because of the ongoing waves of COVID. So it'll all wash itself out in the end. The only thing that I really needed approval for through council is that we did receive the surplus from WSIB, which is rather significant because it is 45% of the town's annual premium. And we are suggesting that amount, because we didn't budget for that refund, we didn't know that it was going to be offered. We are suggesting that it go into a reserve because, as council knows, in the 2022 budget, we did have the service delivery review and the market check that we're doing presently. And while those costs were budgeted for, the recommendations that are going to come out of those two reviews will be what ends up costing us money. So we were hoping that we could put this into a reserve to be brought forward in 2023 to help offset anything that we recommend to council through that budget process. And the only other thing I wanted to point out was Appendix 3 to the report is our quarterly awarding of contracts. So we have awarded a streetlight maintenance contract, and it's I believe it's for 3 years. I could be wrong on that. It might be 4. And then the fuel management system, we ended up not awarding it. It was highly over budget compared to what we anticipated those costs would be for installing fuel pumps at the workshard. So we are looking into other alternatives in that respect, and we may eventually this fall end up with a rental of fuel tanks. So we did not award that RFP. And the bills and accounts that we've paid for the last quarter are included in the report if you have any questions on any of those.
Okay. Any questions for Carrie? No? All right. Can I have a motion then to receive the report and to direct staff to move the WSIB rebate, which was $34,045.14, into an HR reserve to be used in next year's budget to help cover some of the costs from the service delivery review and market check? Moved by Councillor Bernardo, seconded by Councillor Buffett. All in favor? Carried. All right, and the next report is from our Director of Development and Operations. We've dragged in from vacation. Thanks, Jim.
No problem at all. Good evening. Back in 2017, 2018, we started receiving some inquiries from residents close to the Simon Street Stormwater Management Pond over by Russell Court, specifically the east end of that pond. To them, it appeared it was slowly encroaching towards their property. So staff did look at this area and compared it the following year, at which point the fences began leaning actually into the stormwater management pond, the fences between the properties and the residents. Staff did contact Steve Burnett and Associates, our engineers, for a solution and an estimate to the repair. This was estimated at about $50,000, and that we did budget that for 2020 to come out of our general capital reserves. To have a better understanding of what was going on there subsurface wise, we decided to do some boreholes, and that report was returned back to us in December of 2021. And it did show that the root cause of this was progressive settlement, surprising settlement over a number of years since the construction in the late 90s, early 2000s of that subdivision and storm water management area. So, Steve Burnett and Associates, they did produce a request for quotations for the town. This was put out this spring. It closed June 24th. We did send this out to 12 local contractors, as well as posting it on our website. We received one submission back from MJK Construction Limited of Mississauga. And this quote did come in at a grand total of $89,000, just over $89,000 with HST, which is considerably over our budget estimate of $50,000. Part of this increase can be attributed to the change in scope after our geotechnical work with the helical screw posts for the fences to hold everything together. The second part is the cost increases that we're seeing with and after COVID-19, substantial increases on other projects that we've seen as well. Given the progression of this settlement, the issue with the fences and the residents next door, and the shortage of being able to get contractors, staff suggesting with going ahead with this project this year, the grand total with our portion, the 1.76% of the HST, is $80,817.79. And this would come out of our general capital reserve as we proposed before. Currently, I believe there's still 1.1 million in this reserve currently. So further implications is we could see further settlement and fencing damages next spring. Spring does seem to be the worst time of year for settlement over there. With the town's strategic priorities, council's strategic priorities, we hit target number 3 with investment in funding of critical infrastructure for the future. If there's any questions.
Thank you, Jim. Councillor Buffett.
Yeah, I just wondered, is this something that we should expect is going to happen with every one of these things in every subdivision that we have them in? Or is this just a one-off in this particular case because of the settlement?
Through your worship, we're not seeing this in any other locations. since my time starting in January of 2018, it's been a fairly substantial progression with this one. We haven't seen it in any other location. So it just seems to be something with compaction, the original placement of soil when it's constructed. So.
Okay. Is it something that you're aware of happening in other municipalities? Like
I have seen it in my previous location with a stormwater management pond. This company, MJK, they've done work before down in the Greater Toronto area in similar situations. So it apparently does happen from time to time.
Yeah. Well, and I think to your point, something we have to do, and waiting another year isn't going to make the problem go away or make the scope of work any smaller. So I think we just have to move ahead and do it. So are there any other questions for Jim while we have him? No? Okay. So the motion reads then that we're receiving the report and approving staff's recommendation to award the project to MJK Construction Limited in the amount of $80,817.79, inclusive of HST, and that's to be funded from the capital reserve account. I have a mover and seconder for that. Councillor Fegan, seconded by Councillor Bernardo. All in favor? That's carried. Thanks, Jim. Enjoy the rest of your holidays.
Thank you.
Okay, take care. All right, and the last item on the regular agenda is the request from the Rotary Club to allow for the serving of alcohol as part of the Heritage Music Festival event on August the 6th between 2 p.m. and 11:30 p.m. The recommendation in the agenda was just simply to receive that, but I'll make another recommendation, and that is to receive the report and to authorize the serving of alcoholic beverages for the event being held August 6th, 2022 from 2 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. On the following conditions. Number one, that the Rotary Club provide proof of liability insurance with the town of Shelburne listed on the policy with coverage at a minimum of $5 million for liability. And number two, that the Rotary Club will provide a copy of the special occasion permit issued by the AGCO. I'll go ahead and move that. If there's a seconder, Councillor Fegan. Any discussion on that? Councillor Buffett.
Yeah, could I just refrain from voting on it? I don't really think it's a big conflict of interest, but I'm just going to refrain from voting.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. All right. Any Councillor Wagner?
Yes, thank you so much. Do they need paid duty for this as well?
That might be a requirement under the SOP permit. I'm not sure. Jennifer, do you happen to know offhand?
It's either paid duty or security, either or they will require.
Okay, so that would just encompass in whatever, I guess, the requirements would be that they would just need to follow, right?
Under
Okay.
the AGCO requirements, correct, yes.
Okay, excellent. Just wanted to double check.
Yeah, and I mean, they've done this before, so I'm sure they'll be quite comfortable navigating the requirements of that permit. So, okay, any other questions or comments? Call the question then. All in favor? That's carried. And just note that Councillor Buffett abstained. Okay, are there any notices of motion for this evening? Deputy Mayor Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor Mills. So the notice of motion, I have sent the language to our clerk already, but I'll simply just read what I sent over, and then I'll provide some brief comments, even though I know we're not discussing the motion today, but I think it's important. But in any event, the language is, be it resolved that staff look into what it would take to have a transit stop installed near the commercial development located on Highway 89 and 124, and report back to council regarding the possible options and costs associated. And I simply just want to say that I want to be clear on the record here to say that this is by no means trying to hinder the progress and the survival of the downtown core. We have a lot of significant development on the west end, and this is simply to ensure that people have access to support all of our businesses. We can't assume that everybody has access to cars there are people with mobility issues, et cetera. And so hence the reason why this notice of motion was brought forward. So we'll discuss that at the appropriate time, and then we'll take it from there. Thank you.
Okay, and just for the sake of clarity, that would be a stop for the existing gray transit route that we have?
That's correct. Yeah.
All right. Okay, so we'll consider that one at the next regular council meeting. Any other notices of motion? Oh, sorry, Denise.
Sorry, thank you. I just thought I'd provide some background that when we originally looked at the existing locations, there was already a hope to look at that location when the plaza was developed. So where we're stopping on School Road is not ideal, and it never has been. There was review by Gray in looking at incorporating a spot within the No Frills Plaza. And unfortunately, because of the legalities of the process to have that approved on private property, it was not continued because it was just so cumbersome with respect to timelines. So we opted quickly for School Road. There was also consideration that with the 4 existing spots, that it wouldn't necessarily mean removing one, but adding a 5th, whereby it would just have to dovetail with the schedule that takes the riders into Orangeville. And in that case, whether or not it's a GO connection. So certainly something that was in the works. I will be following up with Gray County, and we can give you more information. Even as a report, we were going to do this regardless of your notice of motion. So just wanted to let you know, it's certainly something that was identified as a very important connection with the total system coming in and out of Shelburne.
But just with that, Denise, so, but it seems like the option that was on the table was at the No Frills.
Originally, we were hoping to have it at No Frills. Not only was it a spot that we thought many members of the community would utilize, it was also a great spot for people that didn't have to stand on the road because it is an on-demand system. And it was, a good and safe pathway for you to get into, including if you had a bike, whether or not you could leave it there, but you could potentially, if we had bike racks at Fiddle Park, use that as an option. And as I said, it was certainly just, not that it wouldn't have worked out, it just the time required to go through their head office and legalities of getting approvals and the insurance to be on that property through the property owner was just going to hinder us getting that 4th location in play. So
okay.
We hope that we have, a better, maybe more streamlined process with the other development property owners. The other thing we could only then look at is public property and whether or not that would make any sense, because we have 2 road authorities on those intersections. I'm not sure if, the safety issue with respect to that would also bump it out further and further north on 124, but there is another subsequent entrance there as well. So I just wanted to let you know, certainly something that's very important, and we had looked at it and we will follow up with you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Good. All right. Any other motions? No. Okay. All right. On to communications then. Were there any communication items that anybody wants to deal with? No. Okay. Can I have a motion then to receive those items listed under communications for information? By Councillor Bernardo, second by Councillor Hall. All in favor? That's carried. And can I have a motion for the confirming bylaw? Councillor Hall, seconded by Councillor Wagner. All in favor? That's carried. And a motion to adjourn at 7:12. Councillor Hall, moved by, seconded by Councillor Fegan. All in favor? All right, thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your week.